Media freedom activist groups have expressed their concern over media reports that the state security agencies attempted yet again to vet SABC Group Executive for News and Current Affairs, Moshoeshoe Monare. Now, the South African National Editors Forum, that's SANEF, Media Monitoring Africa, it's MMA, SOS, that's Support Public Broadcasting Coalition, and the Campaign for Freedom of Expression say the move by the SSA undermines the fundamental principles of media and editorial independence and the freedom of the press. It's reported in the media that the SSA summoned Monare for a top-level vetting and security clearance. But for more on this matter, we're now joined virtually by the Director of Media Monitoring Africa, William Bird. Unfortunately, the SABC and SSA have declined to comment on this issue. So let's just talk to William and just walk around what we're hearing and this request to vet Monare once again. William, great to have you. Thanks very, very much for joining us here on the program.
Morning, Leah. Thanks for having me on the show.
So we do know then when the SABC's Group Executive News came into the position of Group Executive of the News, he went through a vetting process. Why now? Why would he need to be vetted again at such a crucial time?
Well, that's one of the critical questions. I think let's just go back to the start about this idea of vetting as though somehow it's legitimized and a necessary step, right? Vetting and security vetting comes from, is effectively empowered from what is called the Critical Infrastructure Act. That act came into effect in 2022. It replaced the National Key Points Act, which was an apartheid piece of legislation. And essentially it's there to say, if there's a critical piece of infrastructure, like a power station, for example, or sanitary, water and sanitation works, those kinds of things, they need to be protected. They need security people that run them need to be vetted. And so it's focused very much on security and very much on accessing classified information. So, for example, on how the power station works. Now, when you take it to the SABC, which is also critical infrastructure as the public broadcaster, it specifically applies to those that are responsible for the security of the SABC. In other words, people that determine who comes in and who goes out. The security personnel that staff that, you want to make sure that they're doing something or not doing something. It should not be applying to any journalist at the SABC, the head of news or anyone like that, right? So to begin with, the idea that the head of news needs to be vetted is just plain and simple wrong. For them to then come now, 2 years into the job, and say, well, actually, you need a higher level of security vetting is not only extraordinary, it's fundamentally dangerous and at odds with the media freedom and the independence of the SABC.
So let's have a look at this move. Obviously, there was a voice message, a WhatsApp voice message doing the rounds of coming from the president after a meeting of the NWC. And the president is heard in this WhatsApp message talking to the coverage that the ANC are getting in the run-up to these elections and saying that they deserve fair and even more fair, above fair treatment when it comes to the elections and what they are doing for the country. From what you see, do you find a coincidence in what is happening or not really?
I mean, if you're a conspiracy theorist, then you'd say, yes, sure, this is a direct response to that. I think what mitigates against that is the idea that someone would go, okay, so what we're going to do is get the head of news to do a further security clearance, and then that'll make him comply. Whereas if you have a smattering of strategic political thinking, you're going to go, okay, that sounds like a good idea for about 2 seconds to us, and then it's going to be a bad one because this is going to become very public, and we're going to look like a bunch of banana breads, which is exactly what's happening now, right? This would come out. And you would know that if you did that, it would come out. So you have to wonder about it being less of an overt political party strategy and more of some kind of a more sinister, on some levels, idea at trying to undermine the independence of the SABC and specifically to target the head of news. So I'm not sure that it's as easy to draw a link to the ANC, for example. I mean, again, until or unless there's evidence that suggests that. But what is clear is that whoever is behind this is seeking clearly and undeniably to negatively influence the independence of the SABC.
Yeah. So, as you say, there is no evidence that the two are linked, but it certainly does raise question marks, and one has to sort of ask that if that is the motive behind why the SSA want to do this. But you've touched on it a bit for us, but I think it's important for people to listen to this even more. How does this move by the SSA undermine the fundamental principles of what we do here in the media, and of course, more importantly, the editorial independence and the freedom of the press to tell the story to South Africans of what is happening in their country in the best, most independent way as possible?
So the head of news at the SABC is in a very particular position, because effectively he answers to the board, which is how it should be, right? Because you don't want him answering to others, because that was one of the core issues that undermined media independence previously, especially on editorial issues. Now, the SABC is always going to be a contested space. People are always going to be trying to influence it. So when you then get someone that comes along and says to the head of news, we need you to not only be vetted at a higher clearance, we're also going to need you to do polygraph tests. It says to that person, well, there's something that's going on. Polygraph tests, what message does that send to the staff? It says, well, if you stick your head out and if you start doing things, this may happen to you. So it's an effort to undermine and to start to silence media freedom. It says to the head of news that the SSA is out there, they're busy, they're watching you. And to the extent that then influences or undermines the editorial independence, you then start to get the head of news going, well, if I do this, is this going to count against me? Am I then going to be in fear for my job? Am I going to be in fear for committing some kind of alleged crime? Should we be doing this? What if we have to do a story on the SSA? Are we going to do it? Yes or no? And just because of that undermines the very independence and the freedom that he or she in many instances would have. Yeah. And that's the same with any editor in this country. They need that independence. They need to know that whoever their bosses are have got their back, that they can go and report the news, expose whatever they want to do, report on whoever they need to do, especially in an election period. On a simpler level, though, it undermines media freedom, because instead of the head of news now focusing purely on what is happening around the various services that the SABC runs, the head of news is now busy fighting fires around the SSA and whether or not they should be conducting this thing. And that takes away from him doing his job. I want our head of news for the SABC focused 150% on the elections, because it's such a critical point.
And certainly it's all hands on deck at a time like this, and we can feel it moving through the corridors. That is all anybody is thinking and talking about right now is elections 2024. It's a month to go, exactly a month, and to vet a month before the elections. Again, this raises massive question marks. My question to you, William, who instructs the SSA to vet? I mean, perhaps we can start there. Will we ever find out who instructed the vetting of Moshoeshoe Monare?
Well, I think that it's absolutely critical that we do. And in fact, if we don't, we'll be going to court on this, because it's so fundamental that we understand exactly why and how this occurred. So if you read the report, it says that it mentions something about the client. I mean, who would have thought that the SSA, excuse me, had clients? You would have, but anyway, it says that the client had ordered this. So either the client is the SABC, and the SABC to have done this would be an extraordinary thing, or it's the Department of Communication and Digital Technologies, or it may have come from the presidency. Whoever gave this instruction, they need to be identified and they need to be disciplined. They need to be held accountable, because government needs to send a very clear and strong message that this is not acceptable behavior. Because what happens if and when we get a new government and suddenly new people come into power, they think, oh, this is the way you control the SABC. You just do extra high level security vetting on all of them. Then you suddenly open that door. So I think it's fundamental that the board come out and take a clear position and strongly condemn this. that the Minister of Communication and Digital Technologies clearly and unambiguously condemns this, and that they find out and make public who gave this instruction, and that they tell us what steps they're taking to discipline that person.
Yeah, indeed,
or
and that's important. I mean, that's sort of the story and the back end of the story that we're looking for. I mean, asking for vetting, having to do lie detector tests, and all of those kind of things. I mean, those are what, you know, when we read into what the article was saying, that's what they're uncovering. That was asked of Moshoeshoe Monare. Has this happened before? I mean, is this just once again looking into too much interference in the running of things from a government level?
I mean, we've seen efforts at political interference at the SABC on an ongoing basis pretty much since it became, since we became a democracy, from various forces. You know, under Hladi Motsoeneng, it was more clear. There was a very clear ally with one faction to support a particular agenda and to undermine media freedom. This very program, Morning Live, was one of the ones subjected to the most extraordinary forms of deliberate bias that we've seen in democracy. In 2016, it was very clear that there was an effort to undermine the independence of the SABC. In 2021, we saw Patiswa Magopeni, then head of news, coming under massive pressure to do this. As I understand it, she was also subjected to a security vetting initially when she took on the position, as I believe was Mr. Monare. I think, as I said, as a basic point of departure, that should not be expected of anyone in that kind of position.
Yeah. No word from the board as yet, from the SABC board or from the communications minister. I know that, as you mentioned earlier, that's your call. You're saying you need to hear from those two entities. Nothing as yet. Obviously, it's Monday. Hopefully, we will get some word.
Indeed, let's hope so. And it needs to be clear and unambiguous support for the departments and entities responsible for the SABC. They need to make sure that they stand up for the independence of the SABC. If they don't, they're effectively hanging the head of news out to dry.
All right. William, thank you. Thanks so much for talking to us. And again, as William has said, if there is no closure to this, this is something you will take the legal route to find out who put that instruction forward. So, William Bird, the phone line is still up to you. We're going to always be touching base on this very important issue. William Bird, Director at Media Monitoring Africa, condemning the State Security Agency's attempt to vet the SABC's Group Executive of News, Moshoeshoe Monare.